Everybody's back. Introducing Stephen Jesberger from Federal Highways. He's going to be talking about some interesting aspects of the 2020 year. Take it away, Mr. Jesberger.
Okay. I assume you can see my slides, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right, thanks, LJ or Joe, for permitting us to be part of the Jackalope user group conference. And sorry it has to be virtual this time, but hopefully this is still as useful of information. If there's anything that which I'm speaking about of the next 40 or so slides that you would like me to
Am I gone or is Stephen gone?
Further explain or go over individually within each state, let me know and I'd be happy to do so. And because we really want to help out states in these difficult times. Chamber office, we have now 4 people who are working remotely, and then that's Terrence, Paul, and Matthew, and now Allison was the latest person who just joined a couple weeks ago. And then we have 2 new staff in our office underneath Tenja. Lakesh is what he goes by, even though it's his last name. He prefers to go with Lakesh, and then Clayton are both new in our office. And also Ron Vaughn is now the team leader over here. He used to work for HPMS, so he's now the team leader for motor fuel and tax evasion. So with that, so first off, we wanted to talk about the pandemic. What's going on with states. The guidance was provided by Federal Highways, and that essentially says what the first item is, and that is that short-term counts is perfectly fine for people to suspend their short-term counts. Some states have elected to do that, and I'm going to provide some guidance on if you happen to did do some counts. And what's paramount in all of this is that maintaining and keeping all of your permanent sites running during this time, so you know what the influence is of your counts for the year, is very important, so that way long term you can report that data and adjust your counts from prior years properly using your permanent sites. And so if you did do any short-term counting, it's very important that you would mark that data as being having counted during a time frame that that was during COVID, and aspects of what maybe local influences would have had on the traffic counts. That's extremely important because there are things that are taking place on a county level, on a MPO level, on a city level, and even a state level that adjoining states aren't following the same kind of guidelines as other states. So it very much varies on a local jurisdiction level with what's taking place with travel restrictions and with economic activity. And there's no requirement for any missed counts to make up those counts. Is not mandated that be the case. And I don't have my chat pod up, so if there's any questions that come in that I need to address, I'll stop at any time to go over those.
Call it to your attention.
Yeah, go ahead.
Where would Steve mark this information when you say mark it? You mean
well, in your notes section inside of your system, inside of Jackalope.
With HPMS or just in? Yeah, we plan to in Jackalope, but how would that translate through then to the HPMS submittal?
Yeah, so when you do the HPMS submittal letter, it would if you used all of, let's say you didn't do any counts at all. Let's go over that scenario. So in your HPMS letter, you would say, we did not do counting per Federal Highways, letter that we put out, and we therefore took and adjusted all of our 2018 data for 2019, and that's what we had, or 2019 then 2020. Okay. And then you would just put that in your submittal letter that you just did not do any counts in 2020, and that you used your permanent sites to reflect what your current year counts were for all of your data. Or if you actually did some counts, let's say you suspended your season and then, golly, in July you said, you know, I think we can actually, staff is now permitted per the rules of my state, and travel restrictions are now lifted, that we are in a different phase, you know, for your given state or your given city, and then you can go out and do some counts, and you decided to do that, that's perfectly fine. And then you would want to say that, you know, that there were some counts that were in your HPMS submittal letter and or in your own system that you keep track of when counts are done. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Because, and this is the case with metadata, with when analysis is done. You know, when 2001, when September 11th happened in 2001, one of the largest things that people wanted was, what is the travel after the fact? And so we had numerous people coming to federal highways looking for the data after September 11th, and they wanted to know what travel was like after that catastrophic event of the planes destroying the towers and all. And so, you know, the influences of that data and the metadata about it, whether it's being a hurricane or a special event, whatever it is, it's very good to have metadata about your site. So that way, when somebody looks at it 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, that's very important that you know that there's that aspect of what took place in that data. And we're not saying it's wrong data, it's just something that's very atypical. You know, if it's a pandemic that happens only 100 years, that's pretty atypical, right? Okay, so so going over that. So the next one is this one. This slide, which is for segments that their short-term counts, following the new clustering suggestion to derive the 4 parameters is needed to annualize the data, and I'll go over aspects of what that is. So, so if you have segments where short-term counts are missing, following the clustering method to compute the annualized data for 2019 and 20 based on the permanent count sites is what should be done. And so it sounds like from what you're getting from Jackalope, you already have that, which is great. But some agencies don't have that available. So applying those annual changes to these missing segments according to the clustering method is what would be recommended. And then so when we go over this, so if you have the current practice is clustering, that and I assume you guys can see my mouse or not? Can you see my mouse?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So using current practices in clustering is the best way of doing it. We found through the analysis of how to take counts and then annualize them, that clustering is the most accurate way to do it. But if you want to use functional class, if you want to use area type, if you want to use traffic volume groups, or you want to use land use or other input parameters for doing that, that's perfectly fine to do that. Those are all viable options that can be utilized for annualizing your data. And functional class and functional volume groups are all detailed in the traffic monitoring guide, along with clustering. But for 2020, your short data conversion, we are recommending to use the following parameters. That there are aspects, as I just detailed, where there's MPOs have you know, and cities have these certain restrictions, right? And that's very important that you know what those are and the influences of what that would be. And so then you would develop and have your permanent sites that are by those areas that best could be used to annualize and or grow or shrink your data by the areas of either metropolitan statistical areas, MSAs as they're called, micropolitan statistical areas, which are lower in volume groups, or from continuous rural counties. All 3 of those methods can be used for geographical area specific values if you deem that necessary to do that because of local aspects of what's taken place with the pandemic through various reasons, because maybe there's a large airport in that county, maybe there's economic activity that has changed significantly because of some industry or something. You know, there's all kinds of local influences that have taken place, and sometimes it's not necessarily even down in traffic. We've heard from some states that they've had actually 30 to 40% increases in traffic in some areas because they're not having to go to work and they want to get out and they want to go do things or go into recreational areas, and they see very large changes and increases in recreational use. So it isn't always that it's down. It could be that in some areas, and you know, it's not across the board, of course, but there are individual areas where you may see increases and are taking place. But if you're utilizing functional classes, if you don't have functional class 2 for the geographical area, it's perfectly fine to substitute functional class 1 for that. Okay. All right. So as we continue on, just general observation.
There's a
yeah,
comment from Margaret.
Yeah.
A lot of rural areas are up in traffic and people camping in much of the state at higher rates.
Yes. And we have known about this from different states that have told us this. Yes. Yeah, that is the case. So it isn't always that the traffic volume's down. There's just been a fundamental nationwide shift, and it varies a lot by geographical area, and that's why Tinja has this mentioned. I do want to preface these 4 slides that I had from the pandemic. These are not my slides. They're actually Tinja's slides that he will be utilizing during the Highway Information Seminar. So if you want to have more information on this, Tinja and the team leader for our office and the team leader for HPMS, Chris Allen, both will be presenting on this subject at the Highway Information Seminar next week. So by all means, please bring up questions to them if you have them, and what I've said is not clear enough. So just in general, this isn't related to necessarily the pandemic, but we do want to make sure people are aware of this. And Tinja had this in the slide, and I thought it would be good for me to go over this, even though he's going to give you the same slide next week. But you know, roadway networks really don't change that much every year. There might be some functional class changes where, you know, you have an urban area that is growing a little larger, so it swallows up a little bit of rural area. But overall, the roadway networks are typically remain pretty consistent. And so you need to be conscientious of this in reviewing the data. And also, traffic data tends not to change that much from year to year. You can have some high growth areas or degrowth areas, like in the Detroit area, and Cleveland, that have seen people leaving the cities. But overall, most traffic data changes aren't huge. What just happened in this last year is definitely massive changes that we've seen in the United States of 60 to 80% declines in some areas from permanent counters. And that's why I really want to preface that if you're going to do anything, make sure you have your permanent counters operating for all months of the year in 2020. That is paramount, so that we can know what those trends are, and you're not having to have fewer sites that you can use for what the trending actually is. That is, if you're going to have a year that you have all your sites running, this is a year to have that. That'd be the case for your permanent sites. Anyway, your data is related to last year's data, and any changes can't always be due to last year's data problems. We see this. Some states will report an HPMS, and then they'll say, "Oh, you know, the data this year, it's perfect. Last year's data, that's the one that was the problem." And then when we get the next year's data, then they say, well, last year's data was the problem, and it can't always be blamed on last year's data. So please just we need consistent data from year to year, so that way your data looks and reports what is happening on your system as best as possible. So with that being the case, I do have to say HPMS was the easiest year I've ever done. Was this past year? It was fantastic doing the reviews. I got it done in a record amount of time, and the data is better than ever before. There are some areas to work on, and I'm going to talk on that. But overall, the data is looking pretty good, really good, and actually from state to state, it actually looked very good. So I want to go over each one of the questions different people had submitted. I think there were 6 different ones that came in, 5 or 6 that came in for federal highways, and I want to go through each one of those questions, if that's okay, with the attendees. Is that all right with Joe? Did I go over these?
Of course, yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right. So Margaret from Idaho asked, we could really use recommendations on how we are going to recalculate AADTs. Does FHWA have any recommendations? And what we're saying is, if you didn't do counting, then use your permanent count sites to know how to grow or degrow your data for 2020, so you have current year data reported. If you happen to do some counting, then you should apply those annualization processes of hour of day, day of week, and month of year to apply that. It is no different. Will there be a significant amount of probable error and bias, potential bias in your calculations? Yes, it probably will be. We don't know what the influence is of that, and that's why Federal Highways came out with the suggestion of if people don't want to do counts, then that's perfectly fine to wait and not count in 2020. So it's up to the state. But in all cases, it is recommended that you follow the TMG. And when we studied AEDT and looking at both direction and frequency of AEDT from 2000 and through 2012, we had studied 14 years worth of data from 2000 to 2013, sorry. When we studied that large amount of time, it included the down years of 2007 and 2008. And with those down years, we actually saw many traffic counting sites with 20 to 30% decreases during that time period. Is that as much as what happened with the pandemic? No, but it was a down set of months and years for numerous states. And we did not see any appreciable additional error in the calculation of AEDTs in that process. So we think it's a very robust system, but we won't know until we get done with the pandemic and things kind of restore to a new normal or a new back to normal for many agencies and states. And then we'll do another analysis, and we'll actually consider what the data looked like in 2020 to see if there would be more error in that. So we kind of have to wait till after the fact to do that. So for Melissa in Kentucky, factor versus unfactored, definitely factor all of your data. You should not take, I'm aware of no instance where you should take a count and report it as an annualized value if you don't factor it. There are significant amounts of error associated with hour of day, day of week, and month of year if you don't annualize it properly. Please, you need to adjust all of your data. In answer to Melissa. And you use your permanent sites. Might it be that your permanent sites have a little different factoring grouping based upon what Jackalope's providing through your software? It could very well be that you have different groupings, and it might not be as it has been in the past, but that's okay. So expectations going forward, regards to HPMS and expectations for data collected this year. I think Noah, what you're getting at from Iowa is that are you going to have to count this year? The answer was no, you don't have to. But if you did do some counts, then you would annualize those counts. And I hope that makes sense, Noah. And if it doesn't, let me know. I'll be happy to go over it. So Susie asked 4 questions. She was asking about the TPF 5384, which is the AEDT for non-traditional sources. And so that work is ongoing. It's actually using 2019's data, so we don't have to worry about the weird stuff that's happening in 2020. But with that work that is ongoing, we have 2 validation companies, NREL and TTI, who have just released 27,000 locations to Streetlight Data. It was released about 10 days ago, and that data is those locations from over 10 different states. Streetlight Data will provide back to the validation companies, and then they will do a validation on those. And it includes all functional classes and all roadway types will be in that data set. And many states who are part of what is here for Jackalope and High Desert, some of your states have been asked for data, so that's why we've had that. So it's ongoing, and if part of this process will be we will yield part of what will come out of the pool fund will be we're going to analyze all kinds of different data sources. So if you can imagine anything that's out there that's collecting traffic data that can produce 24/7 data, we are going to verify those sources and make sure that that data is accurate. And then if it is, then we will include it part of this study. So it includes all kinds of different data sources. It can include data from loops. It can for signalized intersections. It can include video systems. It can include your speed as signs. It'll include ITS data. All kinds of different data sources will be used in this process. Our goal was to try and maximize the number of 24/7 data sites that we had available for this research. Which has led to some very unique data sources that we never thought were possible before are going to be part of this research, which is pretty cool.
We have a question. We have another question from Margaret.
Sure.
April had wild variances in traffic, more extreme than any other. Should we exclude April?
No. You should leave it in. That's what really took place, even though it was a very unusual travel trend. It's part of what took place for the year. Yeah. So when you look at vehicle miles traveled, right, for the United States, should we exclude a month that we had a very unusual trend? And even though it's only an event that happens once every 100 years, the thought is that the vehicle travel actually was low. The actual apportionment of vehicle miles traveled and associated consumption of fuel related to that also was down. So the amount of information that you know about how it's lower should be included in part of the process of what gets reported when you are applying the factories to the next year's data or this year's data from last year. So if you're taking 2019's data and you're changing it to 2020 to update it to current year, you would definitely leave in the down months of March, April, and or May. Yeah.
She's referring to primarily short-term counts. She said that seasonality may skew the AADT results.
Right. So that would, it's up to you. If you did some counts during the month of April, whether to include those or not, you know, what I would do is this, and I know you have to wait till the end of the year to do this, but wait till the end of the year, take 2019's data or whatever year you had, if it was a 3-year cycle, then it might be 2017's data, and grow it to 2020, see what that looks like, and then take your count that was done in 2020, annualize it, and see how well it compares. If you're uncomfortable with that portable count and how when you annualize it, it may look funky because it's so far off from the trend because of, you know, we just haven't ever studied 50 and 80% decreases in traffic before nationally and studied that. So and that's why Federal Highways came out with the guidance of it's perfectly fine not to do a count and to grow your prior year's counts for that. So that's my recommendation is try it. If it works, let me know. I would love to know whether it comes in close. I think personally it's going to come close. Will it have a larger amount of standard deviation if you do the 95th or 68th percentile? Will it have a larger variance in the counts? I think it will. Could there be a bias on it? I think there could be. I just don't know, and we don't know. But it's perfectly fine to do it either way. It's up to you. Yeah. And it's perfectly fine to me if you want to do the calculations and you say, golly, I have a higher amount of traffic. If I just grow my data and I don't use my actual counts that I did, that's perfectly fine to do that. I'm not saying you shouldn't. But just be consistent across your system, whatever you're going to be doing. That would be very, very important. Hopefully that answers your question, Margaret. Okay, so continuing on, it's actually not the 2020 TMG. It's going to be the 2021 TMG, and the release date is sometime probably going to be in June or July of 2021, and yeah, there is one a new pool fund. I'm going to mention that later on, but that we're planning on doing on using signatures. There's been a lot of promise in the use of signatures for detecting vehicles over and using Bluetooth and other technologies for detecting vehicles across traffic streams along corridors. And so we're looking to do a pool fund on that for origin, destination, things like that. So ABJ 35 is now ACP 70. What changes to the meaning to the DOT? Not very many changes I would expect because of the change in the highway traffic monitoring to a new number now. The WIM subcommittee is the one I happen to chair, and it's staying the same, and we're actually have a meeting coming up in October for that. So anything else? I think I went over all of them. Okay, so Rob
asked for a release date. Is there an anticipated release date for the TPF 5384?
It'll likely be in June of 2021, June to maybe July. Yeah. The streetlight data contract ends, and then the validation companies have a couple more months after that to produce the end results. And Susie, just to give you an update on the pool fund, the item number 1 here, there will be actually 3 checks of the data. Streetlight was going to check their own data, and then NREL is going to check their state's data that was provided, and then TTI will check their state's data. So there will be 3 checks of the data that we're going to utilize. And TTI and NREL are talking to each other and working closely. It's been very difficult coordinating between 3 different contractors who are all moving and doing things a little differently. But it's a good thing. So it keeps me on my toes, keeps me out of trouble. So. All right, Rob, I had some questions, so I want to go over those from Wisconsin. So you're not going to do 2020 counts, which is fine. So when you submit your data, yes, it will. It answers your question. Overall VMT, it likely will be down for 2020. That's correct. And we're expecting that most states will have decreased amounts of traffic in 2020 based upon the influence of the pandemic in March, April, May, June, and now recovering in July. Many states are almost back to normal here in August and September. Not all, but many. Most of the ADT counts used in HPMS submittal in 2021 will be from 1819, which doesn't show reduced traffic. Yeah, so you would want to, just as you do with any count that is more than a year or 2 out, you will need to annualize the current year. And so you'll want to apply the permanent count data influence of your different method that you use. If you use clustering, then you use that to grow or shrink the count to 2020. Which will then lead to what we're talking about here, which is which will mean that the VMT for 2020 will actually go down because you've now produced current year counts to 2020, which from those older counts, you will have them reduced in 2020. Are negative growth factors for ADTs not derived from current year counts allowed? Yes. That's perfectly fine to do that, and we used to call it the growth factors report. We changed the name in TMS. If anybody's run that recently, I never liked the name growth factors because, like what happened in 2007, 2008, it wasn't growth for many states. We call it a change rate report. That's what we're calling it. And so I don't call them growth factors. I call them change factors, yearly change rate factors. That's what you're doing. So I don't like to use the word growth because sometimes it doesn't. Things like that happen. So anyway, so it's perfectly fine to have a negative change rate for your ADTs. What other guidance can be offered in regards to submitting data in HPMS? Document your information as best you can. Make sure that what is submitted, you have provided your HPMS coordinator, who then would be reviewed by the HPMS codes, as much information as you can as what you did. So that way, if there's any questions to it, it's in there. And that way, it's not just for you, it's for anybody who reviews the data. That information will be available. That includes the division office, that includes the HPMS coach, it includes the 3 staff in our office who do the HPMS reviews. We all have that information available. That's why it's great to document that and submit that in your data. what factors should be used for 2021 short term since 2020 is unusual? And yeah, so will you have, I guess, Robbie, maybe you could unmute your phone and I could talk to you about that. I'm maybe not clear on what you're asking about that question.
Even Rob had to leave, so he isn't on the line.
I could probably explain, Stephen.
Sure.
You know, I think kind of your assumption throughout all of this is that people are always using current year factors to factor up their short-term counts. So they're, excuse me, current year data. So they're using current year continuous counters to factor current year short-term counts. And that's not what everybody does. You know, people, you know, historically, the TNG has said use historical factors, and a lot of people are, you know, using the last N years worth of factors. I think maybe Wisconsin uses a smoothing process where they're using multiple years and averaging to come up with current year factors. Obviously, having a weird year in the mix there screws all that up. And I think that's what he's asking is, how are we going to factor 2021 short term since we can't really rely on historical?
Yeah, LJ, great job, or Joe, great job explaining that. So I actually saw this in a couple states. You know, it used to be that there were a lot of funds that were tied to the VMT that states would have reported. And it was amazing coming into the 2006, 2007 time period that many agencies, not most, but numerous ones, were using 2 and 3 year averages, as you just described, Joe, of their values. But then all of a sudden, they didn't like how that down year in 2007 was holding down the amount of growth in vehicle miles traveled they were showing in 2008. So all of a sudden, numerous states went to a 1 year factoring that year. And I thought, because they know it's tied to funding, and I you know, and so I would say use whatever method you're using, and if it's a 2 or 3 year factoring, 5 year factor, whatever it is that you use, that's the way it goes, and that's the way cookie crumbles. And sometimes coming in and out of that means that year will be influenced in those results. And that's the ugliness. The way I see it, that's the honesty and the ugliness of traffic data. Sometimes it ain't pretty, and that's okay. And don't change your process just so that way you can cherry pick the correct number of years so you can increase your traffic. No, that's okay. If you have a 3 year cycle, then the pandemic year will be in that for 3 years, and then leave it in there. It's the same way that we see in the MADD process. That's why Federal Highways came out with a new ADD process, because we know that the AASHTO process, it makes the MADTs look better, and they're much better for checking year to year. No doubt about it. That's a better way of doing it, using the AASHTO for that. But as far as reporting actual MADTs and AADTs that are true to the value in that year, the FHWA method is better because it allows for the influence of the number of days of the week and weekend to properly be part of the process. That's part of what takes place every year. And when Easter or some holiday is in 1 month more of an influence than another month, that makes a big difference. And when you do calculations of, you know, if you're comparing 1 year Easter's in March and the next one it's in April, that can make a big difference in travel patterns. NASCAR travel in certain states, and people who travel certain football games that are occurring when a given state has more of home games in 1 month versus another in the fall. All of these things, we see it, and it's part of the ugliness of what takes place in the data, and that's okay. That's the way life is, and that's all right. So hopefully I've explained that, and so you would not adjust your factors. You would leave those the same process in place and not change it. So hope that is clear. And I'd be happy to
pass it on to Rob, or it's recorded.
Yeah, we would not want any state to change their process just because there's a down year in there. If that's what you're doing, a 3 year, 2 year, whatever it is. I've never been one that subscribes to a multi-year factoring process. You should only use the current year. But you know, I'm not the one who has to do it like you guys are. So Okay, so I know that was a lot of tough subjects. Is there anything I haven't addressed?
There is a question, Stephen,
Yeah.
from Christy from Minnesota. Did any other states get a request from streetlights for the study to provide information on percentage of the 2019 VMT that was from a permanent counter, same year temporary counts from 2 to 4 years ago, from 4 to 12 years ago, and where no counts are taken? Is that a question for the group, Christy, or is that that's a question for Stephen?
It's a question for the group, and then just a FYI to Stephen that this is a bit of a large effort to do, since part of what we send to HPMS each year doesn't say, well, the ADT for 2019 was actually a 2014 count that had been annually adjusted, which is in essence what they're asking to know. So if this is going to be a recurring request, it's a large
there's no
effort.
requirement to answer a request from a vendor to have some data. So I would, if it's too difficult, I would just say, sorry, this is beyond, I mean, what we do at Federal Highways is if we have a FOIA, for Freedom of Information Act request, we actually charge people. And we had a person who came to us and said, hey, we want motorcycle data, very detailed motorcycle data for a given year. We gave it to them, and the cost was minimal. It was only like $100 because they get 4 hours free. All right, so great. On the way they went and they had that data for that given state. And then they came back and said, that was so good. We want all 51 states, including Puerto Rico, or DC. I'm sorry, not Puerto Rico, DC. And we said, okay, fine. The cost now is $2,400. And they said, well, wait a minute. The other one was only $50. I was like, well, yeah, but you only get 4 hours free, and we're doing it now for 50 more states. So that's what the cost is. And then they said, well, we can't afford that. We're a nonprofit. And I said, well, tough beans. That's the way it goes. That's what we said.
Yeah.
And then they ended up paying. It's not a negotiable item. It's what the cost is. We detail it all for them, and that's the way it goes. And so we charged them for it, and they paid it, and they had the money. They had the data, and they loved it. They were happy campers. So
all right.
my
solution, we're trying to provide what we can to help this pooled fund study be as
why do they need the
possible.
prior year's counts? They shouldn't need that for doing the current year counts. Why do you need
They don't want the prior year. They want to. I think what they're trying to figure out is how good is the 2019 value if it's based on a 2014 that's been annually adjusted.
Oh, I see what they're trying to do. They're probably trying to duplicate what the ADT pool fund did back in 2015, 14 and 15, which was analyzing the data. I guess we can talk offline in regard to Minnesota as part of that. But and it might be also have to do with, aren't you doing your own? Is it in regard to pool fund or your own individual research? Because Minnesota is doing your own research on this, right?
This was specifically for the pooled fund. That's what Streetlight said it was for.
Okay. It's no requirement by the pooled fund to study multiple years with the data to get a trending of what the errors could be associated with a portable count. That's not part of the pooled fund. So so you could tell them that Steve said that it's 2019's data only, and we don't need the trending for reporting 2019's data. If they need it for their model, then that's their own choice to include that for the model, which it would make sense why they would want to include that. And I know I'm getting really into the weeds here.
Yeah, we should talk about it offline. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, but I'm really glad you asked that question, because what you just asked, this is almost a bi-weekly thing that's going on with this pooled fund. It is very in-depth, and wow, I didn't realize there's all these facets of traffic counting. Over time, you kind of deal with this, and it's okay, but there's a lot of aspects of this, like gates. And I thought a gate was something you went through to get into your yard, but it's a big deal in segments is gating. So anyway, factoring for class counts. So anybody who wants to talk about gates later on, I'd be happy to. That's not part of what I'm going over here. Anyway, so time-wise, I guess I'm doing okay. So the slides are going to go much faster now, so don't sweat it here. We've got 40 slides, but it's really important that you store the 6 vehicle types that are in the vehicle summary table. Very important that you annualize for all your portable counts. This is paramount. If you're not doing this, please do this. The way your data is getting utilized, when I say data, I mean your samples and the entire national highway system and the principal arterial system. The way that data is utilized for single unit, combination unit, ADT, and also the sample values that come in, very important to have that. And also for VMT, vehicle miles traveled weighting, very important. Factoring reduces your amount of error on this a tremendous amount, so please annualize it. It is still the requirement. It is not going away per the traffic monitoring guide that 25 to 30% of your portable counts should be class counts. Actually out there on the pavement, not obtained by some model, but actually out there on pavement, actually doing portable counts. And actually, we're going away from the term portable and using short-term counts. It will be the term in the 2021 TMG. But anyway, so you need to have your class sites in each one of your factor groups for the different types. Factoring for the hour of day, week, and month of year is very important for me, and also doing a year-to-year factoring for class counts, annualizing it up to the current year. So when you report a single unit ADT in HPMS, that single unit ADT that gets reported should be for the current year. It should not be an annualized value from 2017 that you're still leaving in there and you're not changing it. You're updating the ADTs for each segment. You also need to update the single unit combination unit values when they're reported on the NHS PAS and the samples. And then properly normalizing the data so that your volumes and class data are consistent is very important. All right, so 2020 GIS reviews. The percent peak checks considering percent peak values. Looking at the percent peak values, this is a large source of error that still exists in the data, and I'm going to go through some aspects of this in just a minute. And by the way, anybody who wants these slides, I'd be happy to send them to you. I'll send them to Laura, and she can disseminate them to the group. Annualizing your truck data, applying an axle correction factor, every year your axle correction factor should be updated with your WIM and or your permanent your per vehicle record class data. That is the way to go. And you should not be using an axle correction factor that's 5 years old. If you think the trucking industry stays stagnant in your state and the travel patterns that exist around your state stay stagnant in your state, you need to go out and view some sites, because they don't. Things change. Trucking industry is always changing. And we actually did the state-to-state check of ADT, single unit ADT and combination unit ADT, better than ever it's been. There's still a couple issues between states, which you've been notified from your HPMS coach, but very good. I used last year's data to do it, and I'll do it again for 2019's data. I'll check all 3 of those items between states. So anyway, these are all the different data items that are reported in HPMS. I don't have to go over those. I think everybody's probably even got them memorized. So this is what the summary table looks like. We're still seeing variations from year to year in what gets reported on this. When you VMT weight your data, it will not change that much from year to year. So please be careful. This is a very important table. We take this table and we marry it together with the DM2 table, which is your vehicle miles traveled by state by functional class, and then we produce a combined table that has what we call the VM4 table, and that has travel by vehicle type by type of road. And because the VM2 is vehicle miles traveled, and we take these percentages, that's why these percentages should be by vehicle miles traveled, weighted for each one of the 6 vehicle types. So this is a very important table for each state when they submit these values. They're used extensively by the industry and by the public. It is extremely important. Properly annualizing your data on every one of the NHS, National Highway System, and PAS roadways. And by the way, if I come back to here, can I calculate from HPMS the single units on interstates for rural interstates? Can I calculate what the percentage is breakdown of combination units for rural interstates? You bet I can. So these numbers should be dead on with what you get for the National Highway System. These 2 values should be dead on what you get for the National Highway System. There should be no variance in that. It should be these should be dead on values because we have the single unit combination unit values reported on the system. And we are still going to leave this in the 2021 TMG. It's in the 2016 TMG of the class factory. Very important aspect. If anybody wants to know how to do that, there's a website where you can actually go and learn about VMT weighting. It's a 4-step process, and like was said earlier on the videos that you have, they're very boring and long videos, so bring popcorn, but it's a 4-step process that we'll go through. All right, so now we're getting in the nitty gritty. HPMS uses a value of 30 now. We've included in our SAS runs criteria of questionable versus not questionable. So just FYI on that. So if you report a value under 5, we're really going to question that because what you're saying is when the value is under 5, you're saying every hour is almost exactly the same hourly volume. And that's very rare to have every hour be so similar. With D factors, these are the different ranges that we're using in part of our SAS runs that we run on the data. Then we also do a number of checks. You know, there are a road or two where the single unit ADT is above 40% or the combination unit is above 40% of ADT, but it's kind of rare to have, you know, these so large. And then we also see sometimes, I actually saw the data where single unit combination unit was more than the ADT, not 80%, but more than the ADT. And that's physically impossible. You can't have the sum of the trucks more than the total volume for the site. So something's awry there with what gets reported. We did add something new, so hopefully it doesn't cause as much angst in the States, that if you have a low volume site, if your ADT is 500 or something smaller, and then when you look at your single unit and or combination unit, and if it's at 0, then that's okay. Because you have a 0 value reported when you have low volumes. I think 500 is kind of a little too large. I would probably peg this more around 100. You know, if you have 100 vehicles, there's going to be a couple of vehicles that are single units probably in there. You might not have any combinations, but you're going to have some singles. But we were pretty generous on this with not flagging the data. And then this is, I'm pretty serious about this because this goes to, I'll call it the Barney hug. This goes to is your data all talking to each other and making sense? When I take my ADT and I multiply it times my percent peak value, is it more than 4% of your single unit and less than 40% of your single unit for the for that segment? If it's less than 4%, what you're saying is that there's no single units in the peak hour, you know, when it's less than that, and when it's more than 40%, you're saying that your truck traffic, almost everything is in 1 hour, more than close to half of it. And so, you know, you're going to have some single units that are in the peak hour that are between 4% and 40% of the total single units for the day. So those are the ranges we've set up. And I know this is pretty sophisticated, and it may not be an easy concept to get. But what we're saying is when you have your percent peak value, which should be based upon a portable count, right? Should be based upon a short-term count, that your single unit needs to make sense with your single unit, the peak value you obtain needs to make sense with your single unit ADT that you report. In the same way with combination unit, that the combination unit value needs to be 4%, above 4% and below 40% for the day when you think about the percent peak times ADT. Okay. All right. How did you get in here? Oh, my cat got in here. All right, so directional factors. If you add a facility type 1, it should be 100%, pretty simple. And then we looked at 50 to 75 with facility type 2. Ks need to be between 4 and 30. We already talked about that. Percent peak values. Typically, we're looking at somewhere between 0 and 25%. That's a new check that was added this year. If percent peak value or combination unit value is 0, then your single unit and combination unit value should be less than 50, meaning that if you have less than 50 single units for the day, could it be that some of them aren't in the peak hour? You bet. But if you got 100 single units, it's probably going to be that a few of those are going to be in your peak hour, one would think. So we added this check too. This was brand new. I should have tagged that as new. And then AADT is less than future ADT. Future ADT needs to be greater than ADT, and it doesn't have to be. Sometimes you have low growth areas, but again, we're talking about forecast year here. So it's either 20 or 25 years, and now we're doing the math saying that when we look at future ADT, we're looking at the growth of the ADT over time. Okay, so when you do the calculation for percent peak, I just want to make sure this is clear. This is a great graphic that we've developed. Justin Clark and I developed this together. So when you look at volume, you're looking at ADT, right? And you're going to take the value for the single units in the peak hour. So you're looking at this hour for this, and if it's 48 hours or 72 hours, just plot 3 days worth of data. Take the highest day for that 3-day count, 2-day count, or if it's 24 hours. And then that highest day, the number of single units in that peak hour, you're going to take that value and you're going to divide it by the AADT. That's the way you come up with the percent peak. Okay, that's the way the calculation works. All right, so future ADT, these are the different checks that we're looking at. We're looking at some reasonable amounts of growth for the, do you have things that are negative? Like you can't point. It's 0% growth predicted. Shazam, sometimes the future ADT is exactly the ADT. I think in 20 years, you're not going to have exactly the same ADT. That's kind of rare. And then sometimes we see the exact same value for all the samples in a state. It's happening less, but it has happened. We're also checking your total vehicle miles traveled change, and we're comparing against your population that you have. And I should change that. It shouldn't be growth factors. It's TMAS change rate report. And then gross domestic product and then fuel consumption. So we're comparing your HPMS vehicle miles traveled and the changes that have happened over time, right? And we're looking at, does it match what you get from the census? Does it match with your GDP? Does it match with your fuel consumption? All three of those need to be in sync. And if they're not, that's probably all right. Is there a question?
Yeah, Stephen.
Okay.
Nicholas asks, are these slides all the traffic data checks that HPMS does annually? I go nutty when a new check is implemented.
It's not all of them, but it's most of them. It's like 95% of them. To include all of them, it's a lot. It would be like most people would be falling away from comatose if I went over all of them.
But for our perspective, Stephen, and I think what Nicholas was on to say is, what is the best place to get these QCs as they get added or updated in the HPMS system? We kind of got the same thing. That's sort of what we were just talking about. We would like to have every single one of these checks in Jackalope. And, I was going to have...
Yeah, and this is the bad thing about doing this. Are there some sites, like I know Idaho, we've thumped Idaho a few times. Sorry, Margaret, I'm going to pick on you, but sometimes their D-factors in that they get away from the cities, they have very high D-factors, and that's just the way it is out there, and that's okay. And K-factors, they have very unusual K-factors, but in Idaho that is, and many Western states have this, and that's okay. Just because we're calling it a caution. But if 80% of your values are 80% or something, that's a big deal. If there's a few of them, and this is where the areas are that they are because of the local influence of what's taking place, and you have your permanent counters that are producing D-factors that are that high, then that's okay. The more we do these prescriptive rules where we have this box, then we have the HPMS people that are putting the values up into the box and then they stop. And then all of a sudden there's this artificial wall. And I don't want to do that because traffic data, I'd much rather that the data represent what's really there. And then the state says, yeah, we know this is beyond 85 because that's what you've set, but this is what we're seeing. And this is, these are the permanent counters that are producing this, that we're utilizing and applying to these samples. I'd much rather have that than an artificial wall that people apply because, hey, we don't want to have any errors. When our data comes through, we want it to be crystal clear and not have any, any issues. And I'd much rather the data represent what really is taking place there, and that your sound engineering judgment is being applied there, and that's what your permit sites are saying. And that's okay, because there are very unusual things that happen that somebody in Washington, D.C. can't dream up and make a QC for. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Okay.
So I think what I'm hearing you saying is you'd prefer not to publish all the QC because people might gear or play the system.
I'm okay publishing it, and I'm okay you building a system to do it. But what I don't want somebody to say is, well, that's the rule that Federal Highways came up with, and we're not going to go past that rule. No, I want you, if that's what your system is telling you, if that's what your permanent counter that you have calibrated this year, you're supposed to calibrate your permanent counters every year, and it's working right, and it's showing you that result, and you're pretty sure it's a good value, then go with it. That's cool. But if you haven't touched the site in 5 years and you don't know whether it's working, and you're saying that it's producing a D factor of 85%, well, let's take a hard look at it. So if it's what really takes place on the road, I'm fine with it. And there's nobody in Washington, D.C. who should question your data because it's what really took place on the road. That's fine. That's great that you're reporting it, because we need those really weird things that happen when a hurricane comes in, or there's an evacuation, or there's a chemical spill, or there's a whatever that takes place in a given area. These are the weird things that happen. That's why we do traffic counting many times, is to record that. And that's okay.
Well, and you've gone through a lot of trouble to come up with all these QCs for you to be able to evaluate what data is good and what data is bad. And we would just want that same ability in our system. It's more that they get this before it gets to the HVMS coordinator. So if we,
Joe, I won't use the term. I won't use the term bad. I will use the term. Hopefully, I don't use the term bad. If I do, then I have to take a drink. But it should be a term of it's questionable data, because every now and then I call data bad, like when I produced an image of a state and it has this part of the state is yellow with these values and this part of the state is red with these values. Well, that's, I'm calling that data bad or made up. That's not the way traffic is. That I'll call that bad data. But just because it doesn't pass Stevie Boy's QC or HPMS's QC or our SAS check QCs doesn't mean it's wrong data. If you have done the analysis and you think that that is still correct, just like when Margaret has said, hey, we've checked our sites and that's the values that we're seeing there, that's okay. What I don't want some state to say is, some of you, because the number of people analyzing and looking at HPMS data is growing every year. More and more people are looking at it. And the last thing I want somebody to do is look at your state's data and they say, your data, man, it's whacked. And I can't trust it. It's a bunch of garbage. I don't want them to do that. I want them to look at your data and say, wow, that's really weird. But guess what? In North Dakota, it follows that trend because they've had a massive amount of drilling that's taken place. A lot of people call our North Dakota data wrong. Really, you think there's only one state in the state that actually has increase in traffic in 2007, and it was North Dakota. We couldn't explain it. That's what the data says. I have no reason not. We even called them and said, what's up? And they said, well, we got this oil boom going on up here. And then guess what state had the increase in truck sales? The only state, North Dakota. So it's the only thing that saved us because we were getting hammered because we couldn't explain it. I don't know the reason why. All I know is the data's telling us this. And, and we let it go through.
There's two different discussions going on here. One is, reporting, what you think is accurate real traffic data, regardless of whether it passes some arbitrary QC. That's one thing. And I think Nicholas is writing kind of the same thing. It's like, we're all on board. We're going to report what is the truest available data that we can. But it would also be really useful for us to have the full suite of QC checks that HPMS performs, so that they could go through the same kind of analysis that you go through. It's like, it's flagged, maybe it's perfectly good, but so can we get that full set of checks?
You bet. I would be happy sharing that with you or anybody else, any state that wants it. Yeah, but what I want to caution anybody with is don't build a wall and say, hey, we're not going past this wall. Maybe there's instances where we try and dream up these great checks that do a wonderful job of automating things, but we live in a non-automated world that people do some really weird things, and that's okay.
Yep.
All right. So with SAS, states should be alerted and expected to change why there's large changes in the urban boundaries, low road reclassifications, and methodologies updates. With HPMS GIS checks, I'm checking all these things. I did a state-to-state check this year and provided that information. So states are doing a much better job, at least from my perspective, from a GIS check. It was a lot easier to do it this year. I had numerous states where maybe there's only one thing that I flag, and I'm being pretty nitnoid. And if anybody looks at my comments, I'm pretty brutal with the states. And when I was in the state, if somebody came in and looked at my data that way, I would have got burned big time because I knew there had lots of errors in it. But I'm trying to make it so that way no state gets embarrassed. I want your data to shine. Anyway, so try my best. Anyway, so traffic data challenges, large changes in VMT, dramatic VMT changes in motorcycle buses, it just doesn't take place. So that's why we wanted to VMT weight it. Some states have not implemented that yet. Keep the 6 vehicle types. You have to report the 3 vehicle type, the ADT, single unit, and combination units. So if you have those 3 already, why not keep the 6? It's not that much more data. And you have to go out there and collect the portable class count anyway, so why not do it? Keep and annualize the 6 vehicle types. County is your smallest jurisdiction in HPMS. That's why our method recommends doing it by county. You could do it by route also. You can even use functional class or other methods. So if you go to the Knowledge Center, and then here's where you get to the 4 different parts. Great sleeping material. If you want to go to bed, just pull up one of these videos and watch through it. I guarantee in 5 or 10 minutes, you'll probably be sleeping if you're tired. So it's a great sleeping aid. It's a lot better than taking anything else that you could take over the counter. Using those, but in all seriousness, though, these 4 parts walk you completely through how to do that. And maybe LJ, you've already done that. I don't know. The Highway Community Exchange is brand new, and it exists and it's out there. So I'm going to show you what that looks like real quick. So here's the actual website. And out here I have posted a document that is the webinar series Talking Traffic through October 2021. But if you go over here to the special reports, and so we're actually paying each one of the vendors. We're paying Drakewell and High Desert and MS2 and Transmetric. We're paying each one of them for data from their prospective customers, and we use that data to produce this weekly report. So if you go here to the PDF version of this report, may harm my computer opening up my own report.
While you're doing that, I'm going to interrupt, Stephen. I just want to clarify. Steve, they aren't paying us for your data. They're paying us to go and collect and aggregate your data and send it to the right people. Just to clarify.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't. Yeah, thank you, Joe. That is exactly right. It's for them to put it in this format, which is not a standard format. Literally each week we're talking Monday through Sunday. It's not Saturday to Sunday, or not Sunday to Saturday. It's Monday through Sunday, and so we actually poll, and by Tuesday at 10 o'clock. We receive all the data in, and then by Wednesday around 3 o'clock, we have the report done for the prior week's data, and which is truly amazing. And statistically, Tinj is going to go over this a little bit of how this works, and has gone over it before. Anyway, so what we're showing is these trends, and actually, if you look at the truck trends here is the bluish purple with the square dots. That actual trend is since middle of June, the truck trend has been higher than what it was last year. The passenger vehicles and the all travel is lower, but the truck trend is actually higher. So anyway, so this report's out here every week. A lot of people are using it. We at Federal Highways has decided to continue doing this for the next year, which is a big step in our office to do that. But there's a lot of people who want to see these trends and utilize this information. So thanks for everybody who's contributed to that. Okay. Oops. Oop, no, wrong one. There we go. And okay, so we'll continue on our merry way. So TMG 2021. So the new station format, it will be not a fixed field. It'll be delimited only, and we'll have delimited for all the other data types too. The station data format will be greatly reduced, meaning that literally 1/3 of the format will be gone. So there's no requirement for reporting some of the fields. So hopefully that's better. And we decided to get rid of the fixed field because we're changing it so much. Per vehicle record is still recommended for all WIMs and your class sites of the collecting per vehicle record. There's a lot of states already doing that, and we'll actually have a Talking Traffic webinar coming up in October that's actually going to detail that from numerous different states of what they're doing. Short-term counts is the new terminology. We will not use the term portable count. We're also using the term, instead of using ATR, we use continuous count station and continuous vehicle class. That's what CCS and CVC means. Upgrading classes, sites to class and weight. We're actually seeing an uptick in the number of class sites and weigh motion sites across the board in the United States from states. They're installing more because they're realizing having these permanent sites is what they need. VMT weighting is also important for your class data. Using new data sources and sharing data is the way to go, and that'll be highlighted in the TMG. Seamless reporting of data, meaning that it comes in, gets processed, and goes out on the web, and is literally maybe 1 or 2 clicks of the button. Meyer, that is AADT on all paved roads. So that's coming, and there's actually a report on that I'm going to detail in just a minute. Utilizing the new AADT formula. The new pool fund that we're doing on AADT is actually utilizing the new AADT formula. We're going to be all three companies are doing that. And some states have fewer staff, and there's more automated methods. So, and we're expecting the new TMG to be in July of 2021. It is anticipated that it'll be done by then. So, research updates.
There's a question, Stephen.
Okay,
Sorry.
yep.
Nicholas is saying, we've been reporting our vehicle summary table from only trucks for functional class systems we're required to collect data for. So it's skewed truck percentages as we don't have those truck breakdowns that represent a heavy 35,000 miles on our local systems not reported within. Does that make sense?
No.
Nicholas, can you clarify?
Yeah, I made the comment when we were talking about the vehicle summary table on a couple slides ago.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
So basically, the vehicle summary table shows a breakdown of your percentage of different types of vehicles within those functional classes. But on your other rural and your other urbans, those are really heavily skewed to only the systems that we actually can collect data for.
Okay.
And so there's like 35,000 miles of local roadways that, is hard to say whether or not those are accurate. And we're running into an internal issue as well, as some people are asking, what is our statewide VMT by truck percentages as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the truthful answer is we probably can only report that accurately on our state system and not on any of our federal aided or local system.
Yeah, so you don't have any permanent counters on those lower functional classes to know what those trendings.
Very few.
Yeah, and many states are installing sites. That's where we're seeing most of the uptick has been in rural, and urban, other urban, where they're putting more sites. Yeah, almost across the board, states are putting these in because they're realizing from a Meyer perspective, how am I going to annualize my data? From a HPMS reporting of samples that are on the lower functional classes, how am I going to annualize that data? and for also for knowing the trending for the 6 vehicle type breakdown. For analyzing it is hard to do. So that's what states have done. Yeah, you could utilize information from other states near you if they have sites through TMAS. It allows for sharing of data. I don't know how to get to that answer with it unless you. The only answer is to have permanent sites or have another source of data. Sometimes you can utilize, without putting in a permanent site, you could utilize data in an urban area and get some of these other counts that are out here by looking at your speed is signs or looking at signalized corridors that have loops, maybe mid-block, or are used for aspects of a traffic management system, and obtain those. And for rural, on some of the lower functional classes, sometimes you can go and look at signalized intersections and that have loops and or devices mounted above the light to detect vehicles, like autoscope and stuff. So that, I don't know any other way of getting it other than you got to go out there and put permanent sites in. Did I answer your question, or probably not the answer you wanted?
A little bit of both.
All right. Well, if you need help with this, so just FYI, there is funding available from a safety perspective for Meyer. If you need to put some in, you can use safety improvement funds for this, HSIP. And you can also use, if you have a CMAQ money for congestion mitigation. If you have a county where you have emission is a concern, you can use some of that funding also for putting in permanent sites. Yeah.
Has anyone been successful in using the HSIP funds to put in a continuous site?
Yes. Yes. I've heard of some states. I don't have them memorized who they are, but yes. And that would probably be a good thing for us to, that would be a great question to ask at the Highway Information Seminar next week, is has anybody used their HSIP? I know people have used emergency funds for installing permanent sites when they've had damages from hurricanes and different things, flooding, and people have used HSIP, and I don't know about CMAQ though, utilizing that. So
I've had that conversation with our traffic and safety group, who are the ones that coordinate those HSIP funds, and they were kind of more on the other end of going, we're not sure we would want to use them for that. So I don't know whether it was something they didn't want to do or something they didn't know whether they could do.
Yeah, so some states have sometimes safety and improvement funds that are left over at the end of the year. That's the time to hit them up and say, hey, you know, I want to install these sites because I'm going to use it to produce data that'll can be used from a safety perspective, whether it's monitoring travel by vehicle type by speed, or if it's monitoring from a perspective of a lower functional class to get proper AEDTs on all paved roads. Either one, you can utilize that for that. But some states have all the safety funds that are utilized, and they don't have any room for utilizing it for traffic count. So hopefully, but by all means, if you're having difficulty with what to do to get that, there can be a process improvement plan where the division office gets involved and they say, okay, you know, Nicholas is detailing that, hey, I know that I need to have data here, right? In these given types of functional class roads for me to better be able to meet the TMG guidelines and HPMS reporting of this data and for our own use, right? You're realizing this. So you go to the division office and you talk to the division office person there and say, hey, we need, and then they put it part of the plan. And literally funds will get moved over so that way that can take place. And that's what that planning process is for. Yep. And if you need help with who to talk to in the division office, Nicholas, let me know, or others. I'd be happy to help you out with that. Okay, I think I'm running out of time. I've only got 15 minutes left. So research updates. We're still working on the National Bicycle Network. So the first contractor is done, and now we're working with Oak Ridge National Labs with working on establishing having that software. So that's the next step is in place. The pool fund, I already talked about aspects of that, what's taking place. TMAS next version is included the 2021 formats, so we'll include those once those are finalized. And after each one of these is the initials of who's responsible for this. The developing occupancy factors, we realize that there's occupancy factors for certain vehicle types that we need to research on. So Lakesh Abani is doing that in our office. Then there's the HPMS scorecards. If you haven't seen those, it's pretty neat. It shows you all the different runs that can be done on the HPMS data. Terrence Belts from the HPMS office is doing that. Clayton Clark is in charge of VMT forecasting. And then we're thinking about doing a future study on utilizing signatures, whether they're from loops or magnetometers for O&D movements. Okay, and if you have your own idea for research, let us know. We're always open to ideas of what would best help out the states. And maybe, Nicholas, your idea of how do I get sites on some of these roadways is something that we need to research and figure out how we can do that. That sounds like
we've talked in Minnesota about potentially if the more granular streetlight data could be used kind of like a continuous site.
So
I don't know much about it.
Yeah, one of the aspects of the pool fund, this pool fund here, is can we derive items that could replace a permanent site in some areas where you don't have one? Can that be done? Can you, and not only
can you get that into Jackalope to do all the other processing that you would normally do for a continuous site?
Maybe that would be a data source where you purchase, from Streetlight or some other company that produces similar data like that, and then you end up bringing it in as like a permanent site to your system. Yes, that could very well be the case. So
there's one of my concerns when that pooled fund is the data outputs are not going to be easily imported into a system like Jackalope, because I want to change my workflow just because like Streetlight's a different type of. I don't want to change it as much as I need to.
Yeah, because they're using OpenStreetMap and not HPMS as their backbone. That's correct. Yeah, and among other things. Yeah, you are right. That's exactly the case. All right, so Meyer, that's AADT on all paved roads. I already talked about this before, but what's really important, and that's what we found from the local AADT report that's now done. You can contact Mark Starnes to get a copy of that, or myself. I'd be happy to send it to you. It's going through public review now. It takes us literally 3 to 4 months at least to get final reports to be 508 compliant for disabilities, and also for it to have approval for release. So it takes a long time to get things through lately. But anyway, so you're to have AADTs on all paved roads. You don't have to have them in your system. You don't even have to have them reported to federal highways. You just have to have them available for analysis. So anyway, that's what's required of that. And HPMS is looking to provide the way of reporting that should you choose to use HPMS for having that local data. I know there's a number of states who are already reporting data, and it's pretty neat. The local ADT report has some really cool ways of obtaining ADT on roadways when you don't have ADT. And to me, that is truly a remarkable what TTI Yanni has done in that report. Really neat, some of the work that he's done with how to use these readily available data sets to produce local ADTs, even when you don't do counts on all of your segments. You can only do them on a certain amount. And he went out and did this pilots in a few states to show them what it's like to actually do that. So if anybody wants information on that, let me know. I'd be happy to talk with you about that. Freight analysis framework, massive model used nationwide, and for the first time ever, they're using your data from TMAS for both class and weight data. Multiple years were used, part of the calibration of the model. I think it's going to dramatically improve the actual freight data for those given WIM sites where you have, and there's over 600 WIM sites in the United States now that are being reported to federal highways as of 2019, and they'll actually have the real answer. So instead of having a model number over a larger network framework. Now we have class data and actually weight data that they'll actually be able to use to calibrate the network. So I think it's a fantastic improvement. I'm really glad. I've been begging them for years to use the TMAS data to do that. But this is one way of improving that freight analysis framework, which is a national model of freight travel in the United States. So anyway, there's a WIM utilization briefing that's available. That's been completed. If anybody wants that done, if you're having a hard time making a case for why to do wave motion, this goes through the A to Z of why to do wave motion, all the different aspects of how it's utilized. And I've given it to a few leaderships, different state DOT leadership briefings for them. The traffic data computation is out there. It's a big document that goes over 50 different terms. Then there's a WIM pocket guide that we produced. So that's available. Other resources, there's the ADT. A lot of what is happening with Streetlight is actually hanging. It's information on this prior study that was done in 2015. And this was a pooled fund that the agencies, state agencies had paid for. And the U.S. vehicle inventory is also out there. That's available. And then there's also the 2016 TMG that goes over the 13 classes. NatMac in 2021 will be virtual. It'll be June 21 to 25 in 2020. And then 2022 will be in person, we're planning, in Boise, Idaho. And for the latest information on NatMac, go to natmac.org. Okay. There's going to be some in the fall for this year in 2020 will be some webinars that'll be NatMac related subjects. We just had one in July, and we'll be doing a couple in the fall and winter. That are our subjects that are that need to be gone over sooner than NatMac 2021. And then here's the new ADT formula. We strongly encourage all states to adopt this formula. It is the most accurate way of obtaining ADT. It's more flexible, allows more data to be utilized, and we've developed an 8-step process. It's a presentation that way, and this will be in the TMG. Again, this process will be detailed on how to go step right through using this new formula. But we really think that utilizing this will allow ITS and some of these data sources that where you using the ASTO method, you may not have an MADT and or an AADT for a given site, but using this new method, you can obtain one. So where's your data being used? It just gave literally about 60 gigabytes of data to Auburn University. The non-traditional AADT pooled fund, the TBF 5384, gave them about, I don't know how many, it was multiple years, it was like 5 or 6 years worth of data. We just did a national noise study where it used the TMAS data, volume and class data. National moves model had inputs that we used, and they're actually going to be putting the TMAS data out on the website for people to use for the moves model for looking at emissions. And then there's also the special TBT reports, your monthly data that you send to us and the weekly data that you get sent to us is where that's what's driving those reports. It's been hugely popular. And that's it. So sorry I went over. I planned to leave about 20 or 30 minutes for questions, and I'm at 9:20, 9:21. So any questions with anything I just went over? Is anybody using the new ADT method? By the way, the pooled fund is using this new ADT method. It's required. The Streetlight uses this. It's required that TTI use it and NREL uses it. So just
yeah, Jackalope uses at least the blue section there. I can't evaluate this equation immediately, but what we're probably not doing is the weighting of,
the weighting is what produces the best improvement in the accuracy.
Yeah, and we've had this discussion before. I mean, it's kind of a philosophical thing. Either we have 2 MADTs then, or we have, because we talked about this last time. One MADT is really good for looking at historical trends and all that other stuff. It normalizes it, takes out the weekend bias, and your MADT doesn't. And so either you have 2 different MADTs, or I don't know. But currently we don't have the weighting, but we can.
Well, this is why it's kind of important to use this method versus others. Where is your data? Where is the data that people produce Where is it utilized, right? So we produced the traffic volume trends report, which is still remains Federal Highways one of the top reports, top 10 almost every month, and many times the number one report that people download. What do they compare that with? Well, they compare it with car sales. They compare it with fuel consumption for the month. They compare it with all of these statistics like insurance industry, right? Well, when people are out driving, right, they don't drive differently because we have a formula that says, listen, for this month, you better drive consistently because the AASHTO formula says every one of the months needs to be exactly the same as far as how we weight the weekdays versus weekends, and therefore your driving better be the same way. The insurance industry doesn't do that. They need an MADT that's reflective of the fact that that month has more weekends because people are driving more on the weekends or not driving on the weekends, depending on where you are in the United States.
But on the other hand, if you look at the other side of that coin, looking at factoring, if you take account from Tuesday to Thursday in the middle of, July or something like that, what that gets annualized to depends on whether your year happens to have a weekend, an extra weekend in it or not, right? If you're using that more accurate MADT to generate your seasonal factor, you're actually, I'm just curious what impact that has on factoring. My intuition is it's going to mess with factoring unduly. The AASHTO methodology was good for that reason. It let you kind of take what is the July-ness, what does this look like, and in order to just take any arbitrarily Tuesday through Thursday short-term count and annualize it. So
right, I think there's an ugliness of the data that the FHWA ADT method allows to permeate through to the end result, whereas the AASHTO method, I'll say, kind of coats it over and kind of hides it and makes it look better than it really is. I think there's a variance that occurs in, when a holiday is well, not just a holiday, but it's mainly the weekends and the weekdays that I think needs to be in our factors for us to best reflect, to annualize the data. I don't know. I guess we need to do a study to see that answer, because I don't think there has been a study, as you just detailed, Joe, to see whether that unduly smoothing, I'll call it, that the AASHTO does is better for factors or worse. I have
well,
not
it probably depends. I mean, if you have a year with a lot of weekends in the summer, I know it all averages out, but if people are doing all their counting in July or something, and July has more weekends this year than it did last year, potentially your ADTs this year are going to be lower.
It would influence them, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, the point, I have some questions, but this actually wasn't it. But we actually, to answer your question, we implement the hourly method for sure. What we don't currently implement is the weighted method, and we are guided by our customers. If our customers want the weighted method, that's fine. Our concern has just been that's a big change to what MADT means. It used to mean this. It used to mean that it's something we could use for looking back in time and seeing what how traffic.
Yeah, you could still use it for looking back in time and doing it a year to year. It's just not going to be quite as exactly the same because it's July this year and July last year.
Yeah, you don't know if that percent increase was due to traffic increase or because of the distribution of weekends in that month, right?
Well, it's probably not going to be that much of an influence. I mean, the amount of percentage difference that you're seeing in using this FHWA method is only about like 0.5% or something like that. It's very low percentage difference. But we do know that when you look at the year's values, it actually removes almost all of the downward. The AASHTO method actually has a downward bias, artificial, that this FHWA method does not have. So it actually produces more accurate ADT from permanent sites. The factoring method, yeah, maybe there might be more variance in that, and maybe the overall bias probably would be better, but it may have wider bounds at the 1 or two standard deviations for the values.
So
Yeah,
I just wanted to throw one other point out there, which is that the additional weighting, what you're really talking about is localizing to the current year. And if you use last year's factors, as some customers do, and everybody does until we have the current year's factors, then it'll actually push it in the wrong direction. Toward the,
not necessarily. You don't know which way it's pushing it, but it could push it. Yes, it could. You're right. That's true. But
ultimately, we want our customers to be in compliance with the TMG and all that. Yeah. So really, it's gonna have to be something that our customers say they want. But I just want to make sure that we understand all the consequences. You know, it does change things a little bit, and maybe for the better, maybe for the worse. But we don't want to just change the definition of the MADT out from underneath everybody, and people also everybody.
What do people do? Do people because this is something I need to know. I know we did in Ohio, but that isn't indicative of all 50 states. Do states use last year's values for a temporary value that they plug in to give to people instantaneously? Do they wait till the end of the year? Do they use a rolling 12 months? What do people do?
You're talking about for that MADT, that official MADT?
No, I do a count in July, and I get my county done in July. And my boss wants to release that county because it's done in July. Does he wait? Does the boss wait until the end of the year to get the factors for July for that county? Or do they do a rolling 12 months where it's June through July of last year that they use? Or do they use all of last year's values? What do you use?
I think, yes. Iowa does the rolling 12 months where they, at the end of the month, they recompute factors immediately based on a rolling 12-month window, and immediately are able to adjust their ADTs or adjust their short-term counts using kind of official ADTs. Most people don't. Most people use last year's factors, and that about half of those people at the end of the year recompute those ADTs based on the current year factors, and maybe half people don't. They'll just keep. I mean, it's kind of the rationale for not doing that is then you don't have two ADTs floating around your system. The preliminary ADT and then that final ADT. So
our customers definitely want.
They do all those things you said. Pardon me?
Yeah, our customers definitely want instant data, right? They want instant results, and for us to say, whoa, let's wait until next year to do this, or January to get.
Yeah, honestly, the Iowa method seems the best to me. I mean, because then you get an official ADT, you just have one ADT. But it's harder. It's a different thing. But.
Okay, Did I stop sharing my screen? Hopefully I did.
Yeah, you did. And we are a little over time.
I just wanted to point out that Christy had asked a question, and I don't know if we want to just address it when we come back, or if Stephen wants to talk about it. But it says, who will decide how accurate AADT needs to be for Meyer?
Oh, for Meyer. The people in safety just want some data, and we've pressed them a few times with how accurate it needs to be. Not gotten a good answer, so they're kind of relying upon the TMG and HPMS process for the data, even though the local data isn't reported in HPMS for many states. So that's where they're kind of going. That's why we did the local ADT study. So so there's no good answer on how accurate the local data needs to be. I don't think there is one as it currently stands unless a pool fund is done on that. That being said, though, there is work afoot with the pool fund with us for all functional classes, all volume groups, I should say, but it's studying by functional class, looking at the amount of airbound that can exist in sites. So we took sites where we had 365 days worth of data, and then we took and we sliced it up and said, okay, we're going to grab these 2 days and these 2 days and these 2 days, and we're going to see how well, when we know the real answer of 365, what does a short segment here, here, and here look like if we annualized it? And that's what was done in 2014 and 2015. And we're doing that now, coming up with some of those values. So hopefully that's helpful for all the volume groups with the anticipated amount of tolerance that can exist with counts that could be very low at 500 or less, or very high at over 100,000. So hopefully that's helpful. Does that answer the question? I hope it does.
Yeah.
I'm looking for someone to tell us what it needs to be so we know how to fulfill the request going forward. And
yeah, that's
keep going around in circles.
That's a question to ask your safety person. Press the safety people to do it, because I've mentioned this before, and I've said, well, what, because I just asked it 3 weeks ago to some safety people, and they were like, well, you just have to have the data, and I was like, it's not the answer that I really want. I'm an engineer, so for me to have it's a safety analysis that you're doing, and you're trying to prioritize safety measures in different areas with where you're going to do improvements, and you're using fatalities and crashes together with your exposure rate. That's where we come in. We're the denominator, with which ones should be worked on first, right? And when it's 750 vehicles plus or minus 1,000, how does that figure into whether this project gets done versus this project gets done? I don't know. That's the question that I'm not a safety person. I'm a traffic guy. So if it were my choice, I would say every traffic count in the United States has a plus or minus tolerance on it. That would be, before I leave federal highways in 7 to 10 years, that would be my goal, is that we have a tolerance on every count. I'm a NIST person, a National Institute of Science and Technology, and to me, everything should have tolerances. We do it for weight and motion, but we don't do it for class. We don't do it for volume, and I think we should. Because when somebody does the right thing, when I think about Montana and how Montana goes out multiple times a year and calibrates their permanent sites, and you compare that to another state that 10 years and they haven't calibrated any of their sites, they're not the same. One state is verifying that their systems are working properly and being very diligent about it, and they have a serious QC that they follow on a regular basis. One would think that, and they're maintaining their sites, and there's all the aspects that are involved with that. And then you compare that to another state that, we last updated our axle correction factors 15 years ago, and we don't have any WIM sites. It's not really necessary in our state. And you go down the list of different things that they're not doing or doing. How can they know that their data is good quality? And I think there needs to be standards for what data is and its tolerances. So that way, when I give somebody a number and it's 20,000 vehicles, it's 20,000 plus or minus some tolerance. So that way, when somebody goes to use that data and they take that 20,000 vehicles and they grow it for 20 years, they know that if it's 20,000 plus or minus 1%, that's a completely different than 20,000 plus or minus 10%, right? Plus or minus 10% is a lot wider tolerance. And when you grow that 20 years, your airbound, instead of being this tight, is way up here, and so it makes a big difference on how the data should maybe be utilized or not be utilized for different, because, when people produce traffic data, a lot of people think, our traffic data is used for HPMS, and that's what we reported. Yeah, that's true. But there's so many other uses of our traffic data. It's just, HPMS is maybe like a third of where our traffic data gets used. It really is. It's so small compared to everything else. If you go back to that screen I had, I had a number of screens talking about HPMS reporting of the single use combination and so on. But when you look at all the research that's going on, MOVES model, that's not HPMS at all. National Noise Study, not HPMS at all. Freight Analysis Framework, not HPMS at all. None of them are. They're not at all related. They use the data from there, but they're not HPMS. you know, when you talk about doing your designing pavements, and you're doing level 1, 2, or 3 pavement design, and you're talking about, you know, collecting class data and weighing motion data for the pavement thickness and looking at the attributes of travel, that is not HPMS at all. And you know, you're looking at bang for the buck of recording information that's on a roadway and utilizing it for pavement design. That is a dramatic impact of your traffic data being utilized to save directly, literally millions of dollars in a state, and its influence with pavement thickness and pavement in the design, in the build, and how the slab length and doweling and not doweling and all that, all those decisions that go into pavement. That's where your traffic data gets utilized. It has nothing to do with HPMS, nothing. So that's why we need a tolerance, because when somebody takes it and they use it and they take it as the right answer, I mean, it kills me when I read TRB papers and people use the term AADT. And I've talked to authors and I said, did you really have the AADT here? Oh, no, that was just a short-term count. I was like, well, that's not an AADT. That's a short-term count. That's an ADT. And you should not state it that way. And I just hammer them. I mark up their papers all, you know, I just hammer them, because that's really important, that you annualize the traffic data and you use some method that is reproducible, that other people can do the same thing, so you can compare things.
Okay, Stephen, we're right at almost at 20 till our next thing. Nicholas had a comment too. I'd just like to make a quick comment. I think we need to come back to this discussion on the MADTs. Nicholas basically mentioned the same thing. Probably as a users group, we need to figure out a plan to go forward, like maybe have some of our little mini users groups that we have online. But we'll stick a pin on that, Nicholas, and I agree, we need to look at it before we do any changes. So
okay.
Fair enough. On that note, so right about now, is Rob actually back?